Hey guys, so today let's look at the UK car market, but also the UK motor park. And by motor park, I don't mean the car park at Asda. I mean the park, I mean the total number of vehicles on UK roads, for example. So we know that this is data from SMMT, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. And we know that, for example, the number of vehicles on UK roads actually grew 0.5%, so by 0.5%, to reach 40.7 million, with car ownership rising for the first time since 2019. We also know that now 1 in every 32 cars has a plug, which means, of course, that it's electric. So that's 1.1 million electric vehicles are now in use in the UK. And that, combined with the fact that also internal combustion engine cars have been getting cleaner and more efficient, means that actually the CO2 emissions in the UK are actually down by 1.6%. The CO2 emissions from cars and vans. The average has fallen. So that's good news. There's record numbers of HGVs and vans in services. However, buses have fallen to an all-time low, with almost 17,000 that have been lost over the last 10 years. So much for pushing us all onto public transport. Anyway, let's discuss more of the information that's come out of last year in some detail right after this.
Brown car guy. A brown car guy. Brown car guy.
So as mentioned, one of the things that we've seen is more people getting on the road in their own cars. And we saw an increase in desire, as I actually predicted during the pandemic, that post-pandemic there will be there'll be something of a car renaissance, I said at the time, where people would be interested in getting into their own cars. That made sense because people were not keen on using public transport. They wanted their own space. So it wasn't a real surprise when we found that the number of cars in use in the UK in 2022 rose by 124,393 units to a total of 35,148,045 vehicles. This is a record number of cars on the road. It brought the levels up to, well, when I say records not seen since 2019, which of course was pre-pandemic. Now, one of the reasons that we haven't had car numbers that high, of course, is because there's been a shortage of supply. So physically, there just haven't been enough cars. But some of those shortages have started to ease. Manufacturers have been starting to supply cars. Some of the supply chains are starting to slowly return to normal. But on the flip side, the other thing that's happened is that less cars have been scrapped because obviously people are holding on to cars for longer. So in total, the number of vehicles on the roads is now at well over 40 million. It is 40,723,974. Now, businesses are beginning to get back into gear, so to speak, and that is shown in the number of trucks and vans that are in service, both of which respectively are up 1.9% and 1.7%. So now we've got 615,570 trucks on the road and 4,887,593, nearly 5 million vans are on the road. Britain's HGV park is now at record levels, while vans make up almost 1 in 8 vehicles in use. And that's actually apparently the largest proportion that's ever been recorded thus far, according to this data. Now, the UK's bus and coach fleet, however, has fallen, and it's fallen. The bus has fallen by 2.3%. Bus and coach fleet, sorry, has fallen by 2.3% to 72,766 vehicles. This is actually the lowest since records began. Apparently, 16,608 vehicles of buses have gone out of service over the last decade. More than 1 in 4 buses that are on the road have been in use for over 15 years. So there's some pretty old coaches and buses driving around UK roads, and that says a lot about the whole argument about moving us to public transport, because public transport is supposedly cleaner, but it's not, because it's still running older diesel buses and coaches, and there's less of them around. There just hasn't been the investment to buy brand new zero emission or electric buses and hybrid electric buses, if you like, as well. So that's a little bit of an issue, and I think that needs to be looked at. And I think that these sort of things need to be looked at before the local authorities and mayors, etc., strive so hard to force us out of cars and onto things like buses. When you go, well, there just aren't enough. And the ones that are there are not actually that clean, not as clean as our cars, for example. And talking of that, it's worth noting that despite the overall increase in vehicles, as we mentioned, the overall well over 40 million vehicles now on the road, the average car and van CO2 emissions have actually fallen by 1.6%. And this is obviously, like I said, primarily because of all of those newer hybrid, plug-in hybrid, and of course pure electric cars that have brought those CO2 levels down. But at the same time, I think it's fair to say that also modern cars, newer cars, are also cleaner and more efficient now. So that's probably also contributed to that. As mentioned, 1 in 32 cars are now have a plug. So that equates to 1,089,241 electric vehicles on the road. This is more than half up compared to last year, and it's a total of 3.1% of the total car park on the UK. So that's a significant jump for electric vehicles. Ownership of electric commercial vehicles have also risen. Vans are up 67.3%, and buses and coaches have increased 34.9%. So where there are new buses and coaches coming online, they have been electric. Zero-emission trucks almost trebled since last year, but they still account for fewer than 600 that are actually in use. So commercial transport is always going to be a bit difficult just because of the ranges that are required, not only with buses, but of course especially with trucks, long-distance lorry drivers, etc., etc. Now, sticking with EVs, one of the key points, one of the key issues that have been raised with EVs and why perhaps there's been a bit of a slowdown in interest in them. Obviously, they're expensive to buy. They're getting expensive to charge because of the rising energy costs. But of course, where do you charge them? And this is becoming a big problem. So public charge point rollout continues to lag behind EV take-up. There is one standard public charger for every 36 plug-in cars on the road, which is really, you think about it, it's not really good enough, is it really? But it's actually gotten even worse because in 2021 it was one charger for every 31 cars. So actually we've gone backwards somehow. As they say, there needs to be more intense investment for this. There's no dedicated HGV charging points at all, which accounts for why there's less than 600 of those actually on the road. So we need to deploy an infrastructure for that as part of that thing. So again, there needs to be a look at the commercial aspects of road transport and try and get pollution and CO2 levels down there rather than constantly focusing on the private motorists, I think, anyway. That's my opinion. So let's now throw some interesting facts at you, some did you knows. The UK's most popular cars are super minis and small family cars, lower medium model cars. These account for nearly 6 in 10 cars in service, and it's 60% basically. That's 11.6 million for super minis and 9.2 million for lower medium cars. Now, if you're asking about SUVs here fall into, I guess, dual purpose, and we're talking about 5.2, 5.3 million of them. So not as many as people think, but it is a substantial amount when you think about, when you look at the other categories. Specialist sports, for example, is 1.165 million, so slightly over a million. Having said that, one of the bits of good news is that manuals are still very much out there. In fact, 2 in 3 cars in use are still manual transmission, so that's pretty good. 67.2% of cars driven in the UK were actually made in the EU, and 15% were built in Britain. What else have we got in terms of where the cars are from? And we can see here that Germany obviously is the biggest place. Nearly 11 million cars came from Germany, and then I would say followed by Spain. So I guess Spain, that's probably things like Seats coming through the Volkswagen Group plants that are actually existing in Spain. So I guess that's why Spain is so high up on that. And then France actually is below that at 2.44 million. And then you have Japan at 2.16, 2.2 million, you could say. And then the others are just, far behind. America doesn't really figure on that list at all. Female car ownership has risen by 0.2% to 12,414,260 units, while male car ownership has actually fallen. Hey boys, what's going on? Down 0.3% to 18,070,718. 4.6 million, or 4.663 million, if you like, are registered to companies. So we don't really know the gender information. So if you're thinking, what about the rest of the cars? That's what's happened to the rest of the cars. So 18 million for men, 12 million for women. Women ownership is going up. Male ownership is going down. Interesting. More buses in use in London than anywhere else. That's 10,534. And that compares to the whole of the West Midlands, which is 5,000 buses. East Midlands, 5,000 buses again. 1 in 5 electric vans are registered in the southeast. The east of England is Britain's zero emission haulage hotbed. 306 battery electric trucks registered in that region. The average car and van on the road is about 9 years old, while the average truck is 8.2 years old, and the average bus is about 13 years old. In fact, let's look at that in a little bit more detail. We've got the ages of the cars somewhere. Where are they? There we go. So if you look at this figure here, this graphic here, you can see the age of figures, and you can see that nearly 30% of cars on the road, that's the highest individual category, that's more than 12 years old. You may say, oh, then most cars are old, but no, actually, because if you think about it, if you take the middle one, 20.9% is 7 to 9 year old cars. If you add that into the previous two categories, so the 3 to 6 years and 3 years, you're looking at 40, 54, 55% of cars on UK roads are actually less than 9 years old. So the majority of cars are actually generally newer. But then you have 10 to 12 year old cars with 16%, or just under 16%, and then nearly a third are cars that are older than 12 years. Again, looking at some of these graphics, it's quite interesting to see that petrol is still by far the most popular way of cars being driven. It's at 58.6%, followed by diesel, which is 35.8%, although diesel is obviously falling quite rapidly in recent years. And then you've got hybrid electric, 2.7%, plug-in hybrids, I think that's probably a growing sector, that's 1.2%. And then you've got battery electric, which of course we know is a growing segment, which is 1.9%. It's interesting that pure electric is now higher than plug-in hybrids. Although I do think people should look at plug-in hybrids. Real world users should look at plug-in hybrids, because I think it kind of gives you the best of both worlds if you're able to charge those cars. So a couple of other things to look at. Where is the highest ownership of cars? No surprise, in the southeast, it's 5.9 million. 4 cars exist in the southeast. That's 4.2%. of the total. London is 4.3%, but also the southwest is 4.2%, so that's pretty high as well, but that's at 3.5 million. Scotland only has 2.7 million cars. Again, compare 2.7 million in the whole of Scotland. London alone actually has more cars than the whole of Scotland, and Wales has got only 1.7 million. Which you think of the beautiful roads in Wales, you think, well, you should have more cars. But then, of course, Wales is clamping down a little bit. What other cars are out there? The Ford Fiesta was the top-selling car in 2022. Ford Focus was second, Vauxhall Corsa was third, Volkswagen Golf was fourth, Vauxhall Astra was fifth, and so on. Segments, we've already looked at that. What are the most popular segments? So you've got super minis at 11.6 million. You've got lower medium at 9.2. You've got then dual purpose, which is SUVs, that's at 5.2 million. Executives at 1.5. Specialist sports at 1.165. And actually MPVs, I should have said before executive, MPVs are at 1.6. What else can I tell you? Most popular vans are the Ford Transit. No surprise there. Ford Transit Custom, then the Volkswagen Transporter. But this is interesting. What are the most popular colors in 2022? And I think there's been a bit of a change here, because for a long time, or in recent years, it was white, but now it's flipped back to black again. So black was the number one most popular color with over 7 million vehicles. Then you had gray, then you had blue, silver, aluminium, and then white at number 5. And then you went into the brighter, more dynamic colors, which I really feel we should see more of in the world. I think it just brightens up our road furniture, doesn't it? And improves everybody's mood. So the red is number 6, green is number 7, orange, let's have more orange cars, that's at number 8. 9, hey, that's brown, and brown is profound, that's at number 9. And then beige, well, maybe less of the beige, that's at number 10. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that information. Let me know what you think of it. Let me know what your thoughts are on the car market itself, and also the existing cars on the roads here in the UK. And I'll catch you all in the next video.
Brown car guy.
Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please hit the like button and share this video as well if you can. And while you're at it, check out these guys who also sponsor my content. I am deeply grateful to them because it helps me to buy new equipment, put fuel in the cars, and yes, buy a cup of coffee. You can do the same. just go here. Or right here on YouTube, just hit these 3 little dots down here and click on thanks. Make sure you're signed in first. My content is free, but this is how you can help me keep it that way. I may even send you a gift. Oh, by the way, watch this next.